un test de sunet. Spuneți-mi dacă mă auziți, vă rog. Mă auziți?
My Romanian is a bit limited, but we can hear you well.
You hear me well, but I don't know if the folks over in the studio can hear me. I want to test. Well, if you hear me, it means that my earphones are working fine. So
I hear you very well.
I presume it's okay. Good.
So you belong to the European Parliament?
Yes, I'm a member of Parliament. Yes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Monica Ilieprica, and you're watching Observers to the European Parliament, the Europe of Tomorrow. This program is broadcast by the Romanian Public Television, live exclusively online on the Facebook page of TVR1, the YouTube channel of TVR, Instagram account of TVR1, and the TVR Plus platform. Today, we will be discussing several topics that are on the agenda of the Conference on the Future of Europe, and these are education, migration, climate change, and digital transformation. Now allow me to introduce my distinguished guests. Professor Remus Pricopie, rector of the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration in Bucharest, also known as Snspa or Snspa in Romanian. Good afternoon, Mr. Rector, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
And joining us online are Mr. Aurélien Krejbich, Executive Director of the Civica Consortium, the European University of Social Sciences. Good afternoon, Mr. Krejbich, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Emil Schenkyr, MA student in Political Science and Government, Erasmus Plus student at Snspa. Good afternoon, Emil, and thank you very much for joining us in this program.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
And Deputy Dragoş Tudorache, member of the European Parliament and Vice Chair of the Renew Europe Group. Good afternoon, Mr. Tudorache, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Good afternoon. Many thanks for having invited me.
Deputy Tudorache, I will start the debate with you by asking you, what is the plan of the European Parliament for the education system after the pandemic?
There was a reality that not many of us were in fact aware of even before the pandemic, which was the gap, the disparity that existed between where many of our education systems in Europe were and the digital transformation that was already becoming an evident reality in our societies. And I'll give you some figures. Just before the pandemic, a study of OECD was showing that less than 40% of our educators, of our teachers in Europe were feeling ready to use digital technologies as part of the educational processes. More than 1/3 of 14-year-olds in Europe did not possess the basic proficiency skills, digital skills to actually engage in digital education. And 1/4 of low-income households in Europe did not possess either a computer or the necessary connectivity to actually engage in digital education. And then what happened with the pandemic, all of these processes were accelerated as we all moved online, as we had to put our kids in a different reality. And then these gaps became even more profound and more evident, and not only gaps between member states, but also within member states, gaps between regions, gaps between urban and rural areas. So what are we doing now that we know that we have these gaps, that we have these deficiencies that we need to correct? There is a new action plan which the European Commission has proposed and in which we in Parliament very much believe in and want to support politically, which is a digital education action plan for 2021-2027, which addresses on two fronts these issues. On one hand, it puts forward the idea and the measures and the necessary investments for creating a new high-performing digital education ecosystem. And that means basically infrastructure. It means investing in teachers, in educators, so that they actually reach out that level of skills to then themselves engage in an educational process that is enriching for the students and the children. And high-quality learning content and learning tools, which we also discovered now during the pandemic that we don't have enough. And then on the second front, investing in a new curricula, in the skills themselves, in the competencies that we now need to pass on, as I was saying earlier, on one hand to our teachers, but of course, most importantly, that we need to pass on to our children, to the students, so that they feel and that they are better equipped for the future, a future that is imminently and inevitably digital, and for which there is a new rethink that we need to go through for catching up with this reality.
Thank you very much.
So this action plan will be the framework in which we'll be doing our policies and our investment for the years to come.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tudorache. Professor Pricopie, how do you see this period of almost 2 years of online courses and seminars, and how did you implement the new teaching methods at Snspa?
For sure, it has been a non-standard situation. Initially, when we saw the pandemic evolving, we didn't know what to expect. So for this reason, we are the first university, if I'm not wrong, on 9th of March last year, when I announced we'll shut down the university for 3 days till we understand what's going on. And 4 days later, we started full online programs, and from this point of view, it was easy because we started to introduce in Snspa online programs in 2003. So practically, we had already the technology, we had already our professors and our students exposed to this kind of teaching methods. Also, we try to understand how these online classes were perceived by students, and this fall we conducted a very complex research within our community, and we had really interesting results. 78% of our students saying online classes, considering the context, online classes were very good and good. That doesn't mean we are content with full online, and we are expecting to see when the pandemic will decrease and when we'll be able to start face-to-face traditional teaching activities.
Thank you. Mr. Krejbich, Civica is an alliance of European higher education institutions from several countries with different cultures. How did you decide to form this alliance, and what universities are members of Civica? Mr. Krejbich?
Yes, it all started in 2018 when the Commission and the European Council decided to conduct a pilot initiative, and the ambition was to test or create a new form of cooperation at the European level. And the ambition was for Civica to create an alliance specialized in the social sciences. Universities have been very active in the field of international cooperation, and in Europe in particular, for years. So they have been cooperating with each other through Erasmus+, in exchanging students, in creating joint programs, double degree programs, or research cooperation scheme. So the partners within Civica have been working together for many years already. So there were a lot of pre-existing ties. So the building of and the idea of Civica came quite naturally, that those institutions were already quite advanced in the field of cooperation and very interested in reaffirming their European identity and bringing the European education to the next level. In terms of coherence, the set of partners is very coherent with a clear focus on social sciences and gathers institutions that are leader in their country in social sciences. I don't want to be too long, so I don't want to quote the 8 partners, but it gathers institutions from France, from the United Kingdom, Italy, Sweden, Germany, of course, Romania, and that's it, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Krejbich. Mr. Tudorache, in your opinion, as a member of the European Parliament, how important is this alliance of universities from the European Union?
Well, I don't want to speak too much for Civica. I think the panelists can do that and has done it already. But I can maybe speak a bit more broadly on why these sort of alliances in general are important. And I'll reply when I say that at least for 3 reasons. Number one is the kind of culture that these sort of alliances instills in the students and in the environment around these universities. I am myself a product. I've done my master's in Stockholm University years ago when the universities in the old Europe were opening up their doors for the new Europe. And I can testify for how important that was for my education and for my career later on. So clearly, in terms of creating this sort of environment and this sort of culture of diversity, of European spirit, these sort of alliances are essential. Second reason is because we need in Europe, if we want to be competitive globally on, I was mentioning earlier, the new reality brought by the digital revolution. If we want to be competitive globally, we need to have the capacity to research. We need to have the capacity to innovate. And this capacity in Europe has to come from the networking abilities of our research centers, of our universities, because power comes from might, and might comes from basically joining forces. And the third element is the interaction between us as politicians, as lawmakers, as regulators, and the academia. We need to have these sort of bridges. We need to have dialogues, and it's easier to do that when you have universities actually coming together. When you have these sort of alliances, which facilitates dialogue and facilitates the sharing of experiences and the learning that we have to as politicians to go through ourselves, because we will need to very seriously consider how we are equipping our education systems for the future. We'll probably have an opportunity to discuss that later on in our conversation, because that is, from my point of view, a key priority that should dominate our thinking in the months and years to come. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Professor Pricopie, from your perspective, what are the benefits of the collaboration between Civica and Snspa?
I think, first of all, in continuation of what Mr. Tudorache mentioned, we have to underline the importance of the decision of the European Commission to invest on this kind of networks. You know, the authority for education sits with national countries. But when you talk about access and equity, when you talk about competitiveness, when you talk about research having global impact, in this moment we need networks. And in fact, that was the idea behind this European University initiatives. And we were among the first. In fact, Snspa is the leader of this Civica project. And as was mentioned already, there are in this moment 8 universities, but in the future 2 others from Poland and Spain will join. So it will be a network of 10 very strong universities on social science. And immediately you have access to a network of 10 strong libraries, strong teams of research. In this moment, we talk about 50,000 students, 10,000 professors and researchers, 135 research centers within this network. So immediately you have access to this large European network on social science, and naturally your research, your teaching will have a bigger impact, and also for students, because finally speaking, the students are the beneficiary of these networks.
Thank you. Mr. Krejbich, In short, what are the common elements of the Civica consortium that are working today? For instance, what can you tell us about the programs for students, the joint courses with partner universities, and about your project Civica Research? In short, please.
I'll be very concrete. The political objectives have been wonderfully explained by the two previous panelists. I would like to share three examples. One is at PhD level, master level, and bachelor level. We have created a PhD catalog where PhD students can access seminars from and across the alliances. So according to your field of study, economy or sociology, you can engage and interact with fellow PhD students through the online platform. One of the risks when you're writing a thesis is self-isolation. So through the platform, you can engage with counterparts and fellow, and also access to their expertise and also meet up with peers. At master level, it's also a very interesting initiative. It's courses on Europe, on European affairs that is delivered by 8 faculty from the 8 institutions at the same time, gathering students from and across all institutions. So it's referred as the multi-campus course. And students, the initiative gathered is the pilot one, 250 students can follow the teaching from the 8 faculties, so benefiting from the various expertise across Europe, and also they have to engage with each other in terms of assessment and joint activity.
Thank you. Emil,
I could be very long.
Emil, what is your opinion about the Civica offers for students? Is it useful for you?
Yes, I think I'll get started right away on one of those multi-campus courses that Mr. Krejbich just mentioned. I'm currently participating in a multi-campus course that's called The Future of Europe, which in fact draws on this knowledge and expertise that exists in the 8 faculties across Europe. And that has been very valuable because we can see that from one session to the next, it's no problem to draw on these different experts and researchers and wonderful researchers that we have across the 8 different universities. And this brings a lot and adds a lot of value for us as students. That being one aspect, and the second aspect that I want to mention is that the cooperation and working together with students from all over Europe has proven to be very valuable. It's both personally enriching, but also academically. We get in touch with different ways of thinking, different ways of teaching, and can exchange and integrate this intercultural component into our everyday studies, which Civica made possible for us, and so far has been a lot of fun for us.
Emil, you are a student, a master student. What and where did you study before?
So I'm currently studying at Snspa in Paris, but I'm doing my Erasmus exchange here. So my home university is Heidelberg University in Germany, and before that I did a bachelor degree in European Studies, also in Germany, but at a different university in Eastern Germany in Magdeburg. And what's so interesting about this is that I'm currently on my Erasmus exchange already in a different country. And this also gives me the opportunity through Civica to participate in a multi-campus course that actually takes place all over Europe while being in a different country.
Mr. Tudorache, you are the chair of the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in a Digital Age. We know that digital technology, artificial intelligence, will be more and more present in our lives. And in the future, certain jobs will disappear and some new ones will appear. How is the European Union preparing Europe for these major changes? What is the reaction of the European Parliament to this process of global digital transformation?
I think that as a union, we are already leading, in fact, in parts of what this digital transformation, this digital revolution is bringing upon us, upon our societies, upon our economies and democracies. And it is leading in terms of the political awareness as to the challenges and the opportunities of digital. If we look at the policy documents, the legislative proposals that were put forward in the last 2 to 3 years by the European Commission, if we look at how advanced we are in our conversations politically in the Council, in the European Parliament, You will not find this level of debate neither in the US nor in other like-minded partners around the world. So we are first movers, to call it this way, in terms of realizing the need for regulating and actually putting forward regulations for this new digital reality that we are confronted with. And there is a plethora of proposals on the table of Parliament right now. We have the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Governance Act. We have the new Artificial Intelligence Act, on which I am going to be the Parliament's rapporteur. So all of these, and there are still some further proposals to come from the European Commission. So we are, again, better equipped, in fact, compared to any other global player out there in this respect. Where we still need to do a lot. We need to do a lot in terms of preparing our industrial base, preparing our economies for that, because otherwise, just by regulating, it's not going to be enough. We're not going to be with success part of this global race of digitalization. And we need to do that by properly investing. And this is also a good news in a way, because in the new financial instruments, both the one post-recovery, post-COVID, but also in the structural MFF, there is a very sizable amount of money that is going to be invested in digital. At national level, there is also a very good effort done by many governments allocating national expenditure, national money for that. And where we also need, and this links in a way to our conversation, where we also need to invest is in preparing our educational systems with these realities. You are mentioning our labor markets. Our labor markets need to be adapted to these transformations. And for that, we also need to invest in education. We need to invest in the way our children are being prepared for that, and not only in terms of digital skills, but also in terms of how they live and how societies are adapted to disinformation, for example, a phenomenon that is very much accelerated by digital platforms. So all of this reality needs to be responded to with policies, with regulation, but also, again, with the way we prepare our education systems. And here, as European Parliament, as European institutions, we don't have the necessary competencies at EU level, just as we were caught off guard also in terms of health policies by the pandemic. And this is something that is part of the Conference for the Future of Europe, because we are discussing about that today as well. I see many colleagues across the political aisle very much putting forward proposals on how we need to, in fact, bring more Europe in our education systems in order, again, to be prepared for the digital revolution ahead of us.
Professor Pricopie, did you discuss with your students about the use of artificial intelligence in teaching?
You know, I was listening Mr. Tudorache. He's right about the need to invest in the future, because when we speak about digital or even artificial intelligence, we don't have to speak about the future. We have to speak about today, because some of these technologies are already functional. The question is how many are using these technologies. That means we have to invest a lot, not just at the level of students or pupils, but also at the level of professors, and finally at the level of general population through continuing education programs. Otherwise, these, let's say, new words that we call digital world, this new world will not be understood. People will not see the benefits. Sure, students are open, but also we have to see if professors are open. And when we speak about professors, not just in my university, but across the system, you have professors starting 26 years old, assistant professor, to 65 years old. And we have to understand the differences and even the openness to use and to understand these technologies. So I do believe we need a lot of calm, so we don't have to rush, but also we have to do a lot of clear investments on all layers. Our students are open, but we still have to invest.
Emil, what do you think about having a digital teacher, a robot without empathy?
That's an interesting perspective. I believe that there are certain benefits that we can build on of the digital sphere. We can see that, for example, with with lectures where there's also during in-person teaching, there's 200 or maybe 400 students in a big auditorium. And there a AI-based teaching method with which focuses on the individual needs of the students can be very helpful. But then again, we also have seminars where the interaction between the students and between the professors and the students are vital. And I think that we need to make sure that we keep in mind that we keep these kind of formats alive as well, because that's where later on in the studies we really develop our skills and really further research as well.
Are you afraid of a robot teacher?
So I don't see a robot teacher in the sense that we have a humanoid robot standing in front of a class coming, but in general, I think in terms of integration of digital techniques and technology, we are already well advanced as students, as part of the student body. As was mentioned before, most of the students nowadays are digital natives and have already been in touch with digital technology for most of their lives. But I believe that there is still some work and some maybe also technological competences that we need to ensure that exists with the professors as well, so that we can actually use all the tools that are available to us now.
Mr. Krejbich, is Civica preparing for the future technologies in teaching and research?
Indeed, like it was explained by Mr. Tudorache, those elements are not in the air, they are very concrete. And those alliances in education are very aware of those transformations and are very thankful to the, let's say, to the initiative that are taken by Parliament and the European Commission. So we are trying to translate those changes and those new technologies into reality in practical terms for the students. Civica was a pilot, so it was a way to test new formats and to, again, give more room to the digital dimension, because it was seen as a way to, let's say, bring at the table all students and all faculty via the new technology. So there is a sweet spot that needs to be found between the physical dimension and the digital dimension, and universities are currently working on those aspects and following very closely the various technologies that are appearing and see how they could be applied to education.
Now, gentlemen, let's discuss other important topics. Professor Pricopie, at Snspa, was there an evaluation of the impact of COVID-19 on the Romanian education system?
This is a new topic of research, not just for us. For example, 2 days ago, UNESCO just issued, and the World Bank, they issued a report looking at the negative impact of COVID, and today was already underlined. The pandemic situation practically put us in the situation to recognize we are not prepared for a digital era in an equal way. There are a lot of disparities, and that is a macro picture. If we speak about Snspa at the micro level, we realize not all professors or all students are ready to cope with this new digital teaching, and also some of our students, they didn't have enough resources. For this reason, we decided, discussing with students, to allocate special scholarships for connectivity, something which never was considered before, and also to keep a dialogue with them and to see if everything is okay, because if you don't have connectivity, you are not in the classroom. So we discovered a lot of weaknesses within our campus from this perspective, and it was not a matter of digital skills. It was more a matter of access and equity. And I do believe we address this in a fair way. But the agenda is very, very large, and we are doing our own research within our campus, but also we are trying to understand what happened at the level of Romania, and when this research will be done, we'll make naturally public.
Mr. Tudorache, what can you tell us about the EU digital COVID certificate and other important decisions taken at the EU level against the pandemic?
Well, if we start with the COVID certificate, which has, as I'm sure you know, has prompted quite a lot of debate in our societies and a lot of ideological division between those that believed in it and saw the need and the facilitation that such an instrument actually brings for mobility, not only internally within the EU, but also externally. And then those others that believe that this was an instrument that was restricting rights and liberties for citizens. We in the European Parliament, when this proposal was put on the table by the European Commission, we strived to find exactly that balance between these two objectives, these two important objectives. On one hand, ensuring mobility, circulation-free area, which is so dear to our citizens and so important for our economies, while at the same time ensuring as much as possible that discrimination is not coming as a result of its introduction. If we look at the numbers, and I think it's very important to go past the ideological debate and the rhetoric and look at the numbers. More than 650 million certificates have been generated so far. And it's being used by 50 countries around the world on 5 continents. This says something. I think it shows that indeed it has been an instrument, and it is an instrument that is facilitating the lives of 650 million people, and that's very important. And also importantly as well, it has been a very strong case for vaccination. And I think the fact that we have 75% of our population at European level vaccinated is a good thing. Unfortunately, we still have disparities between member states. Some member states where these vaccination rates are very low, and then unfortunately we also see the effects of that in the number of deaths. And then others who have managed to convince their population to vaccinate better. Beyond the COVID certificate as such, I think what we've managed to do at European level, although in those few weeks after the start of the pandemic, a lot of observers were saying, well, yet again, another crisis and Europe is not ready. In fact, I think what this crisis has shown is that Europe is much readier than it has ever been to actually come forward quickly with concrete action. The coordination on the production and then the distribution, the purchasing and the distribution of vaccines. The unprecedented 750 billion euro package, which we started, I remember that we made the first proposal for that in Parliament 3 weeks after the start of the pandemic. We have never been that fast in Europe, and we have never been that efficient. It was already 2 months later, it was approved in Commission and Council, again, unprecedented. So if we look also at the solidarity that the European Union has shown by leading COVAX. COVAX, as you know, is the framework in which vaccines are being also offered and put at the disposal of other countries around the world that cannot afford to enter contracts themselves. I think there are more than 350 million doses that were made available by Europe as part of these COVAX mechanisms. So again, all of these elements are a very strong response which the European Union has managed to put forward as part of this pandemic.
Emil, how do you perceive the impact of COVID-19 on your activity?
Yes, I maybe can start with the personal experience I had with the universities dealing with the pandemic. And there we have to say that the universities have, as I say, arrived at a new normality within COVID. And that means that we have students across Europe that are leading the numbers of vaccinations. We have vaccination rates in the student bodies that are much higher than in the general population. And we have the whole student body, but also the teachers and staff and so on that adapted to the situation flexibly. Right now at my university, when there's positive cases, we switch to online classes or hybrid classes, and this happens throughout the whole semester. So this is already the reality in the universities and is adapted all the time without bigger problems, one has to say. But looking also at the way we study and what we study, we can see that there is a huge impact that the COVID pandemic has had. It's basically a topic that cannot be avoided in any of the classes I'm currently taking. And starting from the decisions that be taken on the level of the European Union, until going into the smaller details of how communities react to the pandemic. It is always a topic in our classes, and a leading example of how we deal with crisis, and it's one of the topics that we discuss all the time, and need to ensure that we can learn from it as well.
Gentlemen, another topic of our debate is climate change. Mr. Tudorache, what are the initiatives at EU level concerning climate change?
We spoke earlier of digital. Digital has been, as I was saying, a key pillar, a key priority for the European institutions, for the European Union from the start of this new political cycle in 2019. Well, the second one, and one could say an almost more important one than digital, although I don't think ranking them would do justice to any of the two. But a second top priority for the European Union has clearly been the Green Deal. And this comes from the urgency of action. And I think that's also an important point to say. We as Europeans are the ones with the highest level of awareness in the world out of all other continents in terms of why it is important to take action now, in terms of greening our economies, in terms of cleaning our energy mix, and also in terms of educating, of changing mentality in our societies as to, number one, why it is important to do that, and number two, also the habits that we have, the sustainability of our ways of life. So again, in this respect, in recognizing the urgency, in putting it forward as a priority, and also then taking concrete actions, we have really been leaders at world stage. Then, in terms of what concretely was done, number one, it's setting your priorities straight. So we have the 2050 as the target at the European level for basically being carbon free in terms of our output as economies and societies. And for that, there is now a whole series of initiatives, both legislative, also in terms of policy, and very importantly in terms of investing, money that will be invested in promoting these objectives and reaching these objectives. We have now a package on the table which is Fit for 55, which means basically reaching the 55% of our target by 2030, with a range of measures, both in terms of economic and ecosystems, and what we need to do that to green as much as we can and as quickly as we can our economic and ecosystems, to measures related to vehicles, to car production and emissions. Also in terms of our energy mix, very important, the quicker we replace fossil fuel-based energy consumption to green energy, the better, but clearly there we have investments to make. And also, very important, there are realities in different corners of our union which we need to be very mindful of if we want, and this is a very important thing in this Green Deal, if we want to keep everyone on board. We cannot afford to leave member states or regions in our member states behind in this transformation. We have to realize that there are regions, and we have some in the country that I know best, in Romania, which are still heavily dependent on fossil fuel, either because of historical reasons and exploitation of coal, for example, or gas, but also in the way energy is being used as part of today's mix. So we have to recognize that there is a transition to be made in these decades to come before our targets, and that this transition needs to be accompanied both financially but also in terms of policies and other additional measures, both at EU level and at national level, if we are to have a successful transition. There is a revision of the European emission trading scheme, which is being foreseen by the European Commission. There is also a new carbon border adjustment mechanism to ensure that there is fairness between the economies that are performing here in Europe with these new targets and economies that are performing outside of the European Union and which are not bound by the same emission targets and by the same greening targets. Therefore, this CBAM, this border adjustment mechanism, will level up the playing field at the global stage between those economical actors here in Europe and those outside. So again, a quite comprehensive package which has been put together over the last 2 years, and now in the European Parliament we are going to start negotiating, preparing the trialogues with the European Council, with the European Commission, to put the final dots on most of these proposals.
Mr. Krejbich, could you tell us what is the vision of Civica about climate change and the European Union? You also had a recent event on this.
Sure. In terms of climate change, this is a very important topic for the universities themselves, for the students and for the faculty. So this subject is addressed through education and research. So in all these dimensions, the climate change and ecological transition has been placed as one of the priorities for the alliances. And through, again, the teaching and the various projects that are conducted by the research teams, we are trying to embed and help as much as we can, where universities can play its role in the civil society.
Professor Pricopie, climate change was a topic of a recent debate organized by Snspa online. How can European universities help the European Union in difficult situations that require urgent decisions, like this situation with the climate change?
I think not just European universities can help. All universities can and have to help, because as was already mentioned, climate change is a very complex topic which affects everything related to our life. And we have firstly to be aware, to understand what are the risks if we are not acting appropriately, how we can act, and from this we have public policies, so we have to have people prepared to apply and to implement, to design and to implement public policies, but also we have to have, at the level of citizens, the capacity to adapt to the new reality. Without education, you are not going to achieve these objectives. Practically, you have to cover the whole population, never mind, not just students, and you need a continuing education process pro-climate change understanding. So from this point of view, in fact, there are different networks, also at the level of the European Union, but global networks on climate change. A couple of days ago, we just organized a global conference on leadership and climate change, leadership in higher education, and climate change was there, a very important topic. So we have a lot of work. And climate change is not something which politicians can address alone, or industry can address alone, or universities can work alone. We have to collaborate based on our profile and our responsibility. And our responsibility in a university is to educate.
Now, gentlemen, we will continue with another important topic, that is migration. Mr. Tudorache, you are a member of the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. What is the position of the LIBE Committee towards the situation on the Poland-Belarus border?
Well, I can maybe speak on behalf of the two committees that I sit in. One is LIBE, as you said, the Civil Liberties Committees. The other one is AFET, and I also sit in SEDE, the Security and Defense and the Foreign Affairs Committees. So, in fact, I looked at this crisis with the different lenses, with the lenses of as a migration crisis, but also a very important lens, which is that of the hybrid attack, which in fact this situation at the Belarusian, Polish, and Belarusian Lithuanian border was. So we have to recognize that, unlike the previous migration crisis that we've had in the southern parts of Europe, either through the Central Mediterranean route or through the Eastern Mediterranean route, this one was a fully man-made and politically driven phenomenon. We have by now well-documented evidence that the Belarusian regime, with the direct involvement of state authorities, with Lukashenko being responsible ultimately, have orchestrated, have actually organized these flights mostly from Baghdad, from Iraq, but also from other destinations in Middle East, going via Turkey, pretty much advocating a free trip to Europe for all those that I think generally hoped when getting in those planes that they will be reaching Europe. and then also state authorities in Belarus driving by bus these migrants to the border. That is why from the very start in the European Parliament, I remember we've had the first debate on this in summer of this year, and we had it again, interestingly, in the AFET committee, in the Foreign Affairs Committee, because we've recognized again that this was a hybrid attack organized by Lukashenko against the Union, trying to put some of our member states in a difficult spot when it comes to how to manage this. Of course, there is also a humanitarian dimension, a migration dimension of this crisis, because no matter the reasons and no matter the political motivation of those that have driven these people to the border, these are human beings that are living in appalling conditions in the cold, in the forests, at the doorstep of Europe. So we have to recognize that there is also a human dimension. Again, the aspect of pure migration crisis, which we in LIBE, in the Civil Liberties Committees, have looked into, and we have actually called upon the two governments of the two member states concerned, Lithuania and Poland, to also treat this and look at the human dimension of this crisis. Lithuania has in fact, asked for support from the European Union and has received it very quickly. That is why at the border between Lithuania and Belarus, the crisis has subdued much quicker, because Frontex agency intervened, and also through many other mechanisms, the European Union provided support. Poland, unfortunately, chose not to. It has resorted to bilateral demarches to call for help from some bilateral member states, but not support from the European Union. It has not asked for support from Frontex, although Frontex is seated in Poland. That is the irony of things. And then, of course, there the situation has become much dire, and we have all seen over the past couple of weeks what the situation is there. Still, the European Commission, the European External Action Service, we at the level of the European Parliament have chosen to do everything that was possible to be done in terms of diplomacy, in terms of reaching out to those countries that were concerned, and we've managed to basically stop the phenomenon. Flights have stopped already a couple of weeks ago, flying out of Iraq, flying out of Lebanon, flying out of Turkey towards Belarus. And also, I think we've all seen the interventions by Chancellor Merkel, still Chancellor Merkel at the time, the bilateral interventions with Lukashenko to basically ensure that also on the Belarusian side, things are being taken back into control. And then we saw already the first flights organized and, by the way, funded by the European Union through the UNHCR, the first flights out of Minsk back to Baghdad.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
this is a crisis that is still rolling, and we'll still see how it evolves in the coming weeks.
Thank you. Gentlemen, we only have a few minutes left. Mr. Krejbich, how do you see the evolution of Civica in the next years?
Good news is that it works really well. There is clearly a potential for those alliances, and again, for Civica, the first results activity have been very impactful. Our objective is, again, to make Civica a concrete reality for the students. It's not a super partnership in the air. We want to develop and implement activities. We are currently working on what we call the new phase for Civica, because we've been operating for 3 years, and we are currently working for the next chapter. And the ambition is there, it's even stronger. So we are planning to expand. And the scope of activities is, of course, about education. It's also about research, but beyond research is what we refer to as outreach to society in promoting access to higher education, and also expand at the international level to, let's say, raise the awareness about Civica and the European education sector as a whole. So in terms of deployment, again, I think that the story and the journey is only beginning. Whether or not it will become a university as such, it's very hard to tell, because what matters for the coming years is, again, giving shape, even more shape to the alliance, and offering more opportunities to the students and the faculty.
Emil, how do you see your future in the future of Europe?
So the future that I see and that many of my fellow students see is a future where we have a stronger integrated European people, where we have more intercultural relations all across Europe and the true European landscape. Steps like Civica and these initiatives are steps in the right direction, and we see that, for example, with Erasmus, it's been highly popular with students. And but looking at for example, the conference on the future of Europe as well, I see a future where we're not afraid to take bold and decisive steps again towards treaty change, for example, and towards a stronger integration of the European Union. So all in all, I see this tendency to and the willingness for stronger integration and decisive steps again, as we had it in the beginning of the European integration.
Professor Pricopie, could you describe in a few words the Europe of tomorrow?
The Europe of tomorrow will be the Europe that we are building today. If we invest in Europe, in this Europe, we'll have a better Europe tomorrow. And I do believe today we discussed a lot about the investment that we are doing in the Europe of tomorrow, in digitalization, in mobility, Erasmus mobility. So we saw someone, Emil, who will lead the Europe tomorrow. And he will have this background of different universities, different cultural contexts, different challenges. So I am optimistic related to the Europe of tomorrow.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a pleasure for me to have you here on this program. I'm sure our viewers appreciated it very much. Thank you everyone for watching us. Just a reminder that the videos of this program are available exclusively online on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and on the TVR Plus platform. You can watch us live every Friday from 1 p.m. Eastern European Time. Next week, the Romanian version of this program will be presented as usual by my colleague Radu Rădulescu. As for the next edition in English, it will be broadcast in January 2022. Until then, I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas, because we can still say Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. See you in 2022.